shots in arms and money in pockets.
The Biden administration is making good on its promises in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. The United States, under the new president, has now vaccinated close to 100 million people and is set to get 100 million checks distributed to the public in the next 10 days. President Joe Biden made the announcement on Monday as he and other key administration officials prepare to crisscross the country, promoting the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. Meanwhile, more troubling news on the U.S. Mexico border as the number of unaccompanied migrant children continues to surge. We'll get to all of that in just a moment, but first we begin our coverage with Giles Gibson right here in Washington, D.C. And Giles, talk to us about this Help is Here tour. That's what it's being called. President Biden is going to be visiting several states. What's it about?
Well, President Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris are going to be traveling all over the United States, from Pennsylvania and Georgia here on the East Coast to Colorado and Nevada on the West Coast. And the White House is saying that this tour is all about basically educating the American people about the benefits of this $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief package. So that it's not just about these 1,400 direct payments, which are already landing in Americans' bank accounts. There's also lots of money for schools to reopen, lots of money for supporting small businesses, all sorts of things in that absolutely massive bill. Now, there's also, though, a political motivation here, because that $1.9 trillion package was passed in the U.S. Senate without a single Republican vote in support of it. The GOP senators argued that it was just too big a price tag, and also that it would potentially trigger inflation here in the United States. So what we're going to be seeing President Biden and the Democrats doing here is really planting a flag in this legislation and telling the American people that it was passed not with any Republican support, but just by Democrats in the Senate.
Charles, another big story making headlines here in the United States: immigration at the southern border. That's the southern border with Mexico. What's the latest?
Yeah, there are now more than 4,000 unaccompanied migrant children in Border Patrol facilities, and we're getting lots of reports of overcrowding and also just dire conditions for these children in these Border Patrol facilities. The Biden administration has responded. They're sending in FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Their main task is just going to be transferring some of these migrant children from those Border Patrol facilities that I was talking about into the care of the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, the Biden administration, and particularly the Press Secretary Jen Psaki, has been avoiding using the term crisis or disaster when they're talking about the situation on the southern border. But actually, the top Republican in the House, Kevin McCarthy, he's been down to a border area in Texas on Monday with a group of other Republican members of the House, and he actually described what he saw there as worse than a crisis.
Okay, thanks, Charles. That's Giles Gibson reporting there. Well, there is much to discuss. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us now from Miami, Florida, is Jaden Horan. He is a writer and conservative commentator. Joel Rubin is a Democratic strategist and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama administration. He's in Chevy Chase, Maryland. With us here in Washington, D.C., Kate Telenko is the founder and CEO of Corvus Health, a global health firm. And also here with us in Washington, D.C., Joe Williams is senior news editor at U.S. News and World Report. Thanks, everyone, for being with us. Joel, let me start with you. Let's talk about this tour, this national road trip that the president is doing, is embarking on this trip to publicize his $1.9 trillion COVID rescue package. But I'm wondering, why does he need a tour to publicize this? I mean, the benefits are pretty self-evident, aren't they? It puts money in people's pockets, as he just said, money in pockets, shots in arms. There's money for childcare, there's money for small businesses, there's money for mass transit. Why does he have to go on a tour?
Well, you put your finger on part of it. That is the fact that this bill has something more in it than just the relief payments. The relief payments are going to be a big deal. And one might imagine that if Donald Trump were involved, and I think he actually did do this during the first round of relief payments when he was president, he actually put his name on the check. just to remind people where that largesse came from. When Joe Biden is concerned, he is a lot more modest than that. However, he still wants to take credit and wants voters to know that there are things in this package besides relief payments that will make their lives better. Schools are a very big concern among suburban voters, the people who chose Joe Biden as president, along with the direct aid. There are also going to be other programs to fight poverty, to fight hunger. Families with small children are going to get a tax credit. All of those things will get conflated if President Biden does not go out, or it runs the risk of being conflated if President Biden does not go out and sell it. And let's be clear, any president worth his or her salt would do the same thing, because you don't want the opposition, in this case Republicans, to point out what's not there or to take credit for something that they did not vote for. So pretty clearly, this is a PR tour. It's a PR tour aimed at the midterm elections, and it's something that I think would probably be SOP for most people in his situation.
Joel Rubin, as our reporter told us a moment ago, there is something of a political component to this. I'm sure President Biden must remember the initial stimulus bill that was passed by the Obama administration in its first term. It was not publicized like this, and many analysts say that it was too small. And what happened? They lost the midterms in, that would be 2010. Plus, the other thing, we look at this Biden tour, he's going to several states which are sometimes considered red states, Republican states. And we have to know that 5 of the states he's going to will have Senate races in 2022. That's next year. So talk to us about the political side of this.
Sure, Anand, and you're absolutely right. Basically, President Obama failed to sell the rescue plan from 2009 that helped restore the American economy and get us out of the financial crisis. Well, President Biden is not going to make that same mistake again. And in fact, he has a very powerful political argument, which is that 0 Republicans supported this rescue plan. And this is a rescue plan that's overwhelmingly supported by the American people. So the Republican politicians didn't vote the way their own voters wanted them to. And I think you're going to see President Biden point that out time and time again. And in this example of going to Georgia, it's the state that enabled this bill, this rescue plan to happen. It's where 2 senators were sent to the Senate, and they're both Democrats. That gave Democrats the majority in the Senate and the ability to move a bill forward that otherwise Mitch McConnell would have blocked. So President Biden's going to make it clear on who's on the side of the people on this, who's on the side of getting rid of the virus, who's on the side of ensuring that our economy has a resurgence after the COVID virus is stamped out.
Jaden Horan, was this something of a tactical blunder by Republicans? Because no matter which poll you look at, this bill has enormous public support, and it is public support across the political spectrum. Now, we look at this tour that the president is undertaking. Some are calling it a victory lap, but it has put Republicans on the defensive. Was that a mistake that they didn't vote for it in the first place?
No, I don't think Republicans view it as a mistake. Republicans view it as standing on principle. Going into the 2022 elections, Republicans are going to have a choice. Are they going to go back to Trumpism, or are they going to go back to their traditional values of ensuring that spending does not go out of control? And while the $1.9 trillion is certainly needed, most Republicans believe that it was filled with things that ultimately are giveaways to Democratic special interests. And they're going to run and use those items, which will only be magnified in future legislation, as an example where one-party control of the entire levers of government is dangerous to the American Republic. And so, what we're really looking at, just like, Joe said, this is posturing for 2022 with a PR tour for Biden, which is why he's really trying to sell this hard. Because even though the American people in general support the idea of the COVID stimulus, this is just one of what is likely to be trillions of dollars pumped in to the economy and to Democratic special interests.
Right, Jaden, I get your point about the Republicans standing on principle and not voting for this, but their supporters, their voters, Republicans in this country, people who would normally vote for them, support this bill. There's a disconnect between the people who are on Capitol Hill and the rest of America.
Well, I think that is very true. I think the Republican Party has dealt with this issue for the last 10 years. There's a strong disconnect between what is generally a populist and pro-working class base and the principled or party hacks, whatever you want to call them, that sit in Congress, that would rather score political points.
Yeah.
But again, the optics of that will recede when we go into 2022, and the messaging will be on debt, deficit spending, and tax increases.
Kate Telenko, let's talk about what this
But
bill...
I mean, if I could add.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Joel.
If I could add just one point, and Jaden's point, though, I think that it's a remarkable moment in a paradox. Republicans under Donald Trump nearly spent $2 trillion in tax giveaways to the upper 1% of our economy, to the super wealthy. And now Democrats are actually spending $2 trillion to make sure that the economy doesn't go into the tank, and that we get out of the pandemic. And the juxtaposition is very clear about what Democrats stand for, which is working people and ending a pandemic, and Republicans, which is tax giveaways to the rich.
Jaden, that's a good point, isn't it? Donald Trump did give tax breaks to the super wealthy, didn't he?
Well, the tax reform that Republicans passed was designed to spur the economy, and it did in fact do that. And I think, the Republicans in general and the Republican Party, with its history, has always been very pro-business and pro-capital. And I think the party's base, which is very working class, needs the ability to acquire capital. And I think Republicans should pivot on those points to support working class more. I think Joel's absolutely right.
Okay, I want to move on. Kate Telenko, let's talk about what this bill does for the fight against the pandemic. There's money in it to produce more vaccines, to purchase more vaccines as well. We are hearing at the moment that supply is outstripping demand, and many of the country's more vulnerable groups believe that they have been left out of this. So what does this bill do?
So it does a number of things. It purchases more vaccines. We now have 3 vaccines available in the U.S., the Pfizer, Moderna, and the J&J vaccine. It also makes testing more available and also makes it more easy to, it gives $200 million to sequence the different viruses so we can track the variants that are around. It's believed that probably in the next few weeks, the UK variant will become the most common variant in the US. So we are seeing increased outreach to minority communities, such as the African American and Latino communities, because they, as you mentioned, they really are lagging in the number of vaccines that they've received.
So about this UK variant that you are talking about, Kate, that would become prevalent here in the United States, how different it is, how different would it respond to the vaccination here?
Well, it looks like all the 3 vaccines available in the U.S. are effective against it, maybe not as effective as they were against the main strain. But we know that virus, that strain of virus, is about 50 to 75% more transmissible, and it's believed that it might lead to a higher number of ICU cases. That's what's been observed in the UK.
Joel Rubin, I want to move on to another very big key issue in the country, and that is immigration. There's been a surge of immigrants, as we heard our reporter tell us, at the U.S. southern border with Mexico. According to NPR, that's National Public Radio here in the United States, children are being held in warehouse detention centers. This is what the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, who's Republican, this is what he had to say. Let's listen.
We went through a new facility that was built just more than a year ago. They built it with a capacity they thought they could never meet, 1,040 people to be processed. Today broke that record. Today they're beyond capacity. They're having to build into the parking lot a makeshift facility.
Joel Rubin, as you are aware, immigration is a really key issue in American politics. It can make or break a president. There was an NBC News headline today which said, Biden immigration policies cause a predictable border crisis. Why didn't he plan for it?
Oh, goodness gracious. So the border crises that happened under Donald Trump's watch were not predictable, right? I think that this is just a false argument that Kevin McCarthy is promoting, that Republicans use when their backs are against the wall. It's to demagogue immigrants and attack the other, as they've done effectively, is what drove Donald Trump into the White House back in 2016. It won't work. Americans voted for Joe Biden, who was very clear in having a policy about humanity towards immigrants, about opening up our ability to work with the immigrant community that's here, that's undocumented, as well as accepting refugees. And yes, transitions are difficult, and there's going to be problems, and there clearly are execution problems right now with taking care of these young people who are coming across the border. But to blame it on Joe Biden overnight when Donald Trump had the same surges happen on his watch is just fanciful and not going to fly.
Jaden Oren, as we just saw, Republican members of Congress are at the border. They're putting a spotlight on the situation over there. They're hoping to get some political capital out of this, obviously. But as Joel Rubin told us a moment ago, this is about humanity. What is the alternative? Is it putting children back in cages? Is it separating them from their parents again?
You know, I think this is the crisis that doesn't end for the American people. You know, immigration, and specifically illegal immigration, and that's really what we have to focus on. You know, the Republican Party has always been the party of immigration, legal immigration, immigration that is done that follows American law. But there has to be a way that is better than what the Obama, Trump, and now Biden administrations have been doing. And frankly, I think, you know, both parties have been resistant to finding a solution because it energizes their bases, and it is potent political poison in order to get people to the polls. And it's a real shame because, you know, what we know from what's going on the southern border is that Biden's policy, reversing the Trump administration's policies, caused this surge. So while I agree that he cannot solve it overnight, I disagree with Joel, and I do believe that this is entirely foreseeable and predictable. And because he believes in a humane solution, he should have had that ready to go, because we cannot see the same crisis returning that we saw a year ago, 2 years ago, and also under the Obama administration and the Bush administration. I mean, this goes back into the 80s.
All right, I'm going to go to Joseph Williams. Joseph, this week the United States House of Representatives will consider two bills aimed at amending the immigration system in the United States. The first is the American Dream and Promise Act, and the second is the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, specifically. The first bill specifically aimed at people known as the Dreamers. Those were children who were brought to this country by their parents many decades ago. And of course, the other is about legalizing the status of farm workers in the United States. What chance do these bills have in the United States Congress?
Well, they've got a better than average chance in the House, not so great in the Senate because it's still quite polarized. And you're going to need some moderates in the middle who aren't all that enthusiastic about immigration reform. I'm speaking specifically of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. You need to get them on board. Now, it's going to be a difficult sell for both of them, particularly Sinema, who represents a border state. And it's going to require some really intricate wheeling and dealing, particularly since the Democrats can't get rid of the filibuster. And the problem here, I think one of your guests talked about how it goes back into the 80s, and I think that's actually accurate, mainly because we had a situation where we created our own problem. Back in the 70s and 80s, particularly the mid to late 80s, there were a lot of people who were deported from the United States, sent back to places that they had never resided in. Guatemala, Central America, Honduras, from LA, from different places, larger cities, where they had mass criminal records. And so they went back to the countries of their parents' birth, even though they had never set foot there, and they had to find something to do. And what they did was turn to crime and create this state where we've got such a problem. People are surging to the border because they can't stay in their countries of origin. It's a life or death choice, and they'd rather roll the dice and take their chances, even with a draconian kind of harsh system under Donald Trump and a theoretically compassionate one under Joe Biden. And that's one of the reasons why we've had such a surge. And the reaction to the farm bill, the farm aspect of immigration reform, that should be a no-brainer for a lot of red state Republicans, particularly in Alabama and in the central of the U.S., where they need farm workers. But it's still going to be a difficult sell because it's politically dangerous for Republicans to advocate for immigration reform that doesn't make it harsh.
Right, Joseph, just one point. In fact, Jaden Horan made this point a moment ago, in which he said, look,
I'd love to comment.
Yeah, sure, I'll get to you, Joel. Jaden told us a moment ago that this goes back not just to the last administration, it goes back several administrations who've tried to change the immigration system. But looking at what's currently on the table right now, if this is not passed, or a form of it is not passed, what's the consequences?
They're going to be huge. I mean, look, I think the consequences are going to be very, very difficult to assuage because you've got a generation of young people here who want to contribute to America, who are capable of contributing to the U.S., who have known no other country, and if you deport them, you're going to cause another problem. And if you don't get the farm aspect of this bill in order, you're going to have crops. Again, we saw this a couple of years ago when states like Alabama and Texas and Arizona decided to tighten up on farm immigration, and they had no one to harvest the crops. And these are jobs that U.S. residents will not do because it's hard and very low paid.
Okay, Joel, briefly, please, if you can.
And I'd like to make 2 health comments as well.
Sure. I'll get to you.
Sure. I mean, this is all in the right trajectory, but let's be real. Immigration is an historic American tradition. And from Latin America, we have had millions upon millions of immigrants come into this country and be very positive, productive citizens here. We have 12 million that are undocumented. We need to take care of them. And we have to recognize that America is a nation of immigrants. And I think that the American people recognize that in this last election. It's time for the politicians here on the Republican side to get with the program and begin to move legislation that gets us a system that we can have confidence in. Right now, we just don't have that. And that's because Congress and the Republicans don't want to sign on to any bills of any type regarding immigration. And it's very unfortunate.
Kate Telenko.
Yeah, so I wanted to make 2 points about health and the border crisis. The first is that it's essential that we make sure these facilities are not crowded because they potentially can become hot spots for COVID, and you potentially could have people getting very ill or dying under the care of the U.S. government. Also, if they're not sent home in an orderly fashion, we could risk exporting some of the U.S. variants to these countries in Latin America that have much lower rates. And then the second point is that it's essential for the young unaccompanied minors to be given proper care, be placed with families as soon as possible. In pediatrics, there's a concept of ACEs, adverse child events. These are certain traumas like being separated from family, being abused or maltreated. And increased ACEs are correlated with worse mental health, worse health in the future, as well as decreased functioning as adults and decreased earnings. So it's vital that these children be treated well.
Kate, I want to ask you a question. I'll get to you in a moment. Kate, I want to ask you this question, which I've been asked actually so many times, and I hear it all the time. I hear it from colleagues here, from friends, from neighbors, etc. And that is, when do we expect the United States to reach some kind of herd immunity? I mean, what is the benchmark that we're looking for?
I don't think we're going to reach herd immunity because I think, unfortunately, there are too many Americans who are refusing the vaccine. I think we're going to reach a steady state, much like we reach with the flu, with people having to get annual COVID vaccines as well as annual flu vaccines. I do think that we will approach a near normal by summer, and certainly by September, I think that children will be able to get vaccines. So really everyone in the U.S. who wants a vaccine will be able to have it, and I think life will go back to normal, but you'll still see many people wearing masks and social distancing, but I don't expect herd immunity to be achieved.
Okay. Judge Williams, just on the point that Kate just made right now, there are so many Americans. In fact, there's believed to be 1/3 of American adults who will not accept a vaccination. President Biden has been talking about that. Let's listen to what he had to say.
I urge all local docs and ministers and priests to talk about why it's important to get that vaccine, and even after that, until everyone is in fact vaccinated, to wear this mask.
So, Joseph, how big a job of selling the benefits of getting the vaccine is it going to be for this administration? I mean, we could have a situation where all the great work that's being done right now, and we just heard that just on Saturday, 3 million people got the vaccination, but all that great work could be undermined by people who say no to vaccines.
Well, and not only that, but we've got a modicum of governors who are willing to open the doors of all businesses and all restaurants and have people come on inside. It's going to be a difficult job to sell people on the vaccine, mainly because we do have such a polarized electorate. And you have some trouble spots, for example, in the African-American community, where you and I've talked before about this on the program, where COVID is a real serious problem there. But we have a dearth, we have kind of a schism there where there are some people who are vaccine hesitancy, and that is incumbent upon the administration, upon public health officials, ministers, community leaders, to get people to understand that this is not an experiment and this is not a joke. COVID, the choice between a vaccine and getting a disease that could almost ruin your life, certainly, or cause you very serious illness, could kill you, that's a very clear choice. The other problem that we have is access and getting enough vaccines into those communities that have traditionally been under-resourced, that have not had the kind of privileged access to medical care that other communities have. So the administration has to do both. Talk about walking and chewing gum at the same time. They have to convince people that this is safe, that COVID-19 is real, and that the alternative to the vaccine is not one that you want to choose. They also have to make sure that people are getting access to the vaccination. They're getting access to these Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, whatever it takes. You need to get that shot in the arm, and those shots need to go to the communities where it is most needed.
Jaden, as we heard Joseph tell us, this is an issue which is very polarizing. I mean, the fault line is political. So would it be up to, say, political leaders on the Republican side, even former President Donald Trump for that matter, to persuade more people to get the vaccination?
Absolutely. I certainly believe that what we're seeing real time is kind of frightening, where we had Democrats, when Trump first proposed the vaccine in its existence, saying that they weren't going to get it, and the legacy of that is obviously the lower vaccination rates in the African-American community. And now we have the exact reverse, where Republicans who likely had Trump been reelected would have been lining up first, are now suddenly saying that they're not going to get vaccinated. Absolutely. It's incumbent upon our political leaders to ensure that Americans stay safe and that people get vaccinated.
Joel, I've taken a long time to get around to you, but
I need to fact check.
I know you wanted to say something,
Yeah, no, I with all due respect to Jaden, Democrats said that we wouldn't take the vaccine unless it was okayed by Dr. Fauci. It was Donald Trump we didn't trust as our chief medical officer.
But, you know, the thing is that Donald Trump could play a big role now in getting people to take the vaccine.
He should.
I mean, he took the vaccine himself.
Well, he did under cover of darkness. He didn't want to tell anybody. He slunk out of the White House without saying he took the vaccine, and now he's left us all to fend for the mess. It's deeply irresponsible, and I think he needs to step up.
Kate Tulenko, very quickly, I've only got about 20 seconds, but we do hear states like Texas and other states have lifted all restrictions. They've told businesses you can reopen, including restaurants, 100% capacity. Could this precipitate another wave?
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing waves in Italy and Germany. Italy just had a lockdown this week. So I expect to see bumps in Texas, especially since Texas is a state that has lower vaccination rates. So hopefully these governors will impose some new restrictions. And it's going to be a delicate dance for the next months as governors release restrictions and then people get out more. In fact, on Friday, they had more than 1.3 million air travelers, which is the highest number since the pandemic began.
Yeah, there's spring break as well, of course. Well, that's where we have to leave it. We've run out of time. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Great to have you with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.